Hello, everyone. Assalamu alaikum. Good evening, good morning, good afternoon, wherever you are. Many thanks for joining today. My name is Mohammed Saeed, and I'm from Qatar National Library. And I'm very delighted, like you joined this program today on this very important occasion to discuss about biodiversity and the impact of climate change and the biodiversity over here. And I would like to just to give a few words, and then we will have the main program ready. Today we are speaking from the Italian Pavilion at the Agritech Expo organized here in Doha. This pavilion is set under the context where the Italian government is co-hosting the COP26 summit along with Britain. The biodiversity is declining at an unprecedented rate, and the pressures driving this decline are intensifying. The COVID-19 pandemic has highlighted the importance of the relationship between people and nature. And it reminds us that all of the profound consequences to our own well-being and survival that can result from continuous biodiversity loss and the degradation of ecosystems. The recent Global Living Planet Index shows that we are continuing to decline, and at an average of 68% decrease in population sizes of mammals, birds, amphibians, reptiles, and fish between 1970 and 2016. Another study from the United Nations Environmental Programme shows that per person, our global stock of natural capital has declined by nearly 40% since the early 1990s, while produced capital has doubled and human capital has increased by 13%. Until 1970, humans' ecological footprint was smaller than the Earth's rate of regeneration. To feed and fuel our 21st century lifestyles, we are overusing the Earth's biocapacity by at least 56%. The UN's Convention on Biological Diversity set 20 Aichi biodiversity targets, and early this decade as a part of the Strategic Plan for Biodiversity. The recent fifth Biodiversity Outlook published by CBD in September 2020 expressed their grim warnings that none of the targets have achieved, and nor we are on track on achieving those targets. To discuss the significance of biodiversity and what we need to do to protect it, Arab Youth Climate Movement Qatar and Qatar National Library jointly host this Earth Talk series, along with a generous support from the Italian Embassy. Before we ask our guest speaker to share her insights, we would like to invite the Italian Ambassador, His Excellency Alessandro Prunas. Ambassador Liparo Istavu. The Ambassador, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Do you hear me? Perfect. Well, first of all, allow me to thank the Arab Youth Climate Movement here in Qatar, as well as the Qatar National Library for taking this initiative and organizing this virtual talk. Obviously, would like to welcome Tina Birmpili, Deputy Executive Secretary of the UNCCD, who will be the keynote speaker of today. As already mentioned, I'm talking to you from the Italian Pavilion here in the Agritech and Biotech Trade Fair in Doha. It's a trade fair on environmental and agricultural technologies. So it is a space that we, for obvious reasons, imagined and conceived to promote innovative technologies that Italian companies can provide in these fields. But there's more to that. Through our pavilion, we also want to support advocacy and inform and promote on Italy's diplomatic actions for the environment, the green transition, and the fight against climate change. We're also trying to help young generations to make their voices heard on these crucial topics for our survival on this planet. Therefore, we join forces with the Arab Youth Climate Movement, and again, I thank them for their active participation. Italy is indeed at the forefront of the global fight against climate change and in promoting sustainability. For that purpose, the Italian government has recently created a Ministry for Ecological Transition, meaning a specific institution for the transformation of the Italian production system towards a more sustainable model. This is more than simply an enhanced environment ministry, but a brand new concept that aims at subverting the entire approach to production, consumption, and lifestyle in the country at large. Coming back to the international sphere, this year Italy has an even bigger responsibility as we are putting the linkages between people, planet, and prosperity at the center of our G20 presidency. We will also be the host country, as already mentioned, of the UN with the UK of COP26, and also we will also be hosting the UN Food Systems Pre-Summit. So this is a lot of a big diplomatic engagement on the side of the Italian government. As I already mentioned, environment and green recovery are also one of the priorities of our G20 presidency, and it is in this context that the fight against land degradation and the restoration of land and of terrestrial habitats will receive a special attention. Coming to UNCCD, Italy is also quite active in this framework. We are both a donor country, but also one of the countries affected by land degradation. Maybe for this reason, we are the only European state part of the convention to have issued a national report on land degradation neutrality. Moreover, our Ministry of Environment, now Ministry of Ecological Transition, has granted a financial contribution of 6 million euros to the secretariats of the UNCCD for initiatives in Saharan countries, namely Burkina Faso, Niger, and Ghana. It is a program that contributes to the restoration of land, to generate work opportunities for vulnerable population, 20,000 hectares that should be restored, providing for livelihood of 300,000 people, with special attention obviously for women and young population. So in a nutshell, Italy is strongly committed and welcomes, and I personally welcome the opportunity to explain what we are doing. In saying that, let me conclude by thanking again QNL and Arab Youth Climate Movement for hosting us, and I will give you back the floor. Thank you very much.
Merci beaucoup, Ambassador. Next, I'd like to invite our guest speaker, Ms. Tina Birmpili. She serves as a Deputy Executive Secretary of United Nations Convention to Combat Desertification, UNCCD. Ms. Birmpili assumed her position as Deputy Executive Secretary of the UNCCD in October 2020. Before that, she served as the Executive Secretary of the Vienna Convention for the Protection of Ozone Layer and its Montreal Protocol on substances that deplete the ozone layer. Ms. Birmpili had over 25 years of experience in policy analysis and implementation on sustainable development, related issues, and management at all levels of governance. She is a former Minister of Environment, Energy, and Climate Change in Greece. Prior to joining the Ozone Secretariat in 2013, she served as Ambassador of Greece to the Organization of Economic Cooperation and Development, which is called OECD, in Paris. Throughout her career, in which included assignments with the Athens Development Agency, the Open University of Greece, and the Ministry of Foreign Affairs in different capacities, she has been engaged in issues related to environment and sustainable development. She holds a Doctorate of Philosophy and a Master's of Science in Environmental Management and Economics from Imperial College of Science, Technology and Medicine, London. Ms. Birmpili, the floor is yours for 40 minutes, and then we'll open up the question for public Q&A and for myself. Thank you very much.
Thank you very, very much for inviting me. It is a pleasure and an honor to be with you today. I would like to thank the Arab Youth Climate Movement, but also the ambassador who represents a country which has been very, very supportive of UNCCD's mandate. We cannot meet in person because of the COVID-19 pandemic, but it is this very pandemic that makes it even more important for us to address the root causes of this and other pressing environmental linked challenges. You have asked me to talk about how climate change is driving desertification and land degradation, and how this is pushing many species to the edge of extinction. You have asked me also to describe how our organization, the United Nations Convention to Combat Desertification, is addressing this worrying trend. I will try to cover these topics. Yet we cannot talk about the impacts of climate change on the land, our most precious resource, in isolation. Nor can we talk about biodiversity loss and extinction without touching upon what this means for our own species. Climate change is without doubt a major threat to the land, to nature, to biodiversity, and to our own existence. Our dependence on fossil fuel is a major factor in climate change. We must address this by moving to low-carbon societies and economies. By reducing and eventually ending the use of fossil fuels alone will not halt climate change or land and biodiversity loss. At the heart of the challenge, of all our challenges, is humanity's relentless appetite for growth and resources. Until now, human development has largely advanced on the basis of a flawed belief: the planet can keep giving us forever. If a product reaches the end of its life or is superseded, we throw it out and buy a new one. If a field stops producing, we clear a pristine ecosystem to create a new one. If a city gets too dense, we sprawl out into the surrounding countryside. If traffic arteries get clogged, we widen existing roads or build new ones. This approach burns through natural resources and eats into wild spaces and healthy land. It directly drives land and biodiversity loss. However, the loss of land does not just erode the basis of our very existence, damaging the systems that give us food, raw materials, and vital ecosystem services. It does not just leave us more vulnerable to zoonotic diseases. By removing a natural buffer against illnesses that jump from animals to humans, it further accelerates climate change by destroying natural systems that store carbon, releasing more climate warming gases into the atmosphere. This climate change then further damages the land and biodiversity through processes such as desertification. We are caught in a negative feedback loop. As the UN Secretary General said, humanity is waging war on nature. Before we move on to what the UNCCD is doing to make peace with nature and what you can all do to help, let us delve deeper into the scale of the damage we are doing. There have been many studies, including from the world's top climate change and biodiversity scientific bodies, laying out how humanity is destroying the land. They paint a grim picture, but it is one from which we cannot look away. Almost 75% of all land has been transformed from its natural state, and the pace of land conversion for agriculture and urban areas is accelerating. It is estimated that 2 billion hectares of once productive land, an area larger than South America, has been degraded. Since the pre-industrial period, the land surface air temperature has risen nearly twice as much as the global average temperature. Climate change has significantly impacted the health and productivity of our terrestrial ecosystems, contributing to desertification and land degradation in many regions. Between 1961 and 2013, the annual area of drylands experiencing drought increased on average by around 1% per year. This is devastating for biodiversity and their habitats. It means around 1 million animal and plant species are threatened with extinction. It means at least 680 vertebrate species have gone extinct since the 16th century. It means a 20% fall in the average abundance of native species in most major land-based habitats since the 1900s. This is also devastating for people, as biodiversity underpins all ecosystem services. Land degradation and desertification brings direct adverse impacts on the well-being of over 1 billion people. Over 90% of our nutrition comes from food grown on land. If we continue with business as usual, yields will fall, food prices will rise, and nutrient quality will plummet. All this in a world where we must feed 10 billion people by 2050. Soils are the most complex and diverse ecosystems in the world. In addition to providing humanity with 98.8% of its food, soils provide a broad range of other services, from carbon storage and greenhouse gas regulation to flood mitigation and providing support for our sprawling cities. But soil is a finite source, and rapid human population growth, coupled with increasing consumption, is placing unprecedented pressure on soils through the intensification of agricultural production. Livestock takes up nearly 80% of global agricultural land, yet produces less than 20% of the world's supply of calories. This means that what we eat is more important than how much we eat in determining the amount of land required to produce our food. As we get richer, our diets tend to diversify and per capita meat consumption rises. Economic development unfortunately exerts an increasing impact on land resources. If we want per capita meat consumption to be able to rise sustainably at lower incomes, per capita meat consumption at high incomes will have to decrease. And I would like here to draw your attention, apart from Italy hosting or co-hosting the COP26 Convention on Climate Change, Italy is also going to, will set the stage for the upcoming United Nations Food System Summit in July this year, which is a very important summit if we really want to address the interlinked issues between climate change, biodiversity loss, and land degradation. Between the 1980s and 2000s, around 500 million people lived within areas that experienced desertification in South and East Asia, Sub-Saharan Africa, and the Middle East. Over 2 billion people already live in water stress. Again, business as usual will make things worse. The frequency and intensity of droughts are projected to increase, particularly in the Mediterranean region and Southern Africa. By 2030, water scarcity could displace up to 700 million people, being one of the primary sources of forced migration. I could go on, but let us be more optimistic, turn now to what we are doing about it. The UNCCD is one of the 3 international agreements known collectively as the Rio Conventions, as they were agreed in Rio de Janeiro in 1992. That the other 2 Rio Conventions are the UN Framework Convention on Climate Change, under which the Paris Agreement sits, and the Convention on Biological Diversity. This only emphasizes my point about the intrinsic links between land, climate change, and biodiversity loss. The UNCCD is the only legally binding international agreement linking environment and development to sustainable land management. Specifically, our work covers drylands, where some of the most vulnerable ecosystems and peoples are found. So what do we actually do? Our 197 member states or parties collaborate to improve living conditions for people in drylands, to maintain and restore land and soil productivity, and to mitigate the effects of drought. We, as the UNCCD Secretariat, facilitate cooperation between developed and developing countries, with a focus on knowledge and technology transfers, as well as financial assistance for sustainable land management. We are committed in encouraging the participation of local people, the so-called bottom-up approach, in combating desertification and land degradation. And of course, we work closely with our colleagues at the other 2 Rio Conventions to meet these complex challenges with an integrated approach. But to boil it all down, we at the UNCCD are guided by a simple motto: healthy land for healthy people. A key focus under our plan until 2030 is to help nations achieve land degradation neutrality. The Italian ambassador mentioned that Italy is one of the countries that have committed to a voluntary target on land degradation neutrality. Land degradation neutrality, it's a difficult concept to grasp, but basically it means that you bring land into balance by bringing food, water, energy, and nature into balance. And this is at the core of the land degradation neutrality concept. As of today, 127 countries are committed to set voluntary land degradation neutrality targets, with a total of 104 successfully set their targets and associated measures. There are several guiding pathways to achieve land degradation neutrality. Treating land as a precious factor in development and land use processes, which means finding new and innovative ways to meet our needs without converting untouched land. Improving the health and productivity of existing land, which means using sustainable land management techniques such as conservation, agriculture, and agroforestry, and recovering what has been lost through restoration. The restoration of land is central to nature-positive food production, a cooler planet, restoring biodiversity, and reigniting economic growth at a time of economic turmoil. In fact, public and private investment in land restoration is by far the best and most cost-effective option to reduce vulnerabilities to pandemics, climate change, biodiversity loss, and water scarcity. A recent report from the PBL Netherlands Environmental Assessment Agency shows that huge commitments have been made to reverse this problem, directly through the UNCCD, but also through other processes. Current commitments from countries cover the restoration of almost 1 billion hectares of land over the next decade, an area almost the size of China. Over half of these commitments are in sub-Saharan Africa, with relatively few in the Middle East and North Africa, which presents an opportunity for these regions. Of the 1 billion hectares covered by commitments, 250 million can be restored to produce food. This reduces the need for new productive land and helps to increase food security and minimizes impacts on climate and nature. In many parts of the developed world, abandoned agricultural land provides great opportunity not only for food production, but for restoring ecological connectivity. Between now and 2030, the restoration of 350 million hectares of degraded ecosystems could also remove up to 26 gigatons of greenhouse gases from the atmosphere, close to half of what the world emitted in 2019. In total, 1/3 of the solution to the climate change crisis can be found through restoration, conservation, and other land management actions, particularly in our food systems. Restoring forests, wetlands, and other ecosystems can also reinstate nature's defenses against weather extremes and other environmental stresses. One such example comes in the dust and sandstorms that land degradation and desertification have been intensifying on the territory of many UNCCD parties, including the Arab states. Healthy land and ecosystems not only reduce the incidence and intensity of such apocalyptic storms, which harm human health, agriculture, industry, transportation, water, and air quality, but can mitigate their impacts when they do occur. The Great Green Wall Initiative in the region of the Sahel is a great example of restoration in action. This project is restoring 100 million hectares across the Sahel. It is sequestering 250 million tons of carbon and helping communities to be more resilient, creating millions of rural jobs reducing forced migration. These are the kinds of action that the UNCCD gets firmly behind. We are calling on governments to invest in land restoration in the financial packages that they are putting together to help economies recover from the pandemic. We will be pushing even harder on restoration from next year as the United Nations Decade on Ecosystem Restoration gets underway. We are encouraging nations to submit stronger climate action pledges under the Paris Agreement by including land restoration in those. The G20 Global Initiative on reducing land degradation and enhancing conservation of terrestrial ecosystems was agreed under the G20 presidency of Saudi Arabia in 2020, which UNCCD will host its coordination office. This initiative is remarkable in the sense that it will substantively contribute towards the commitments made by countries at restoring degraded land in the world by 2040. The G20 under the Italian presidency is also taking the torch and place land as central in its priorities. We are doing everything within our power to support governments, to support healthy land and healthy people. Dear friends, another strand of our work comes in advocating for behavior change amongst individuals and the private sector, which brings me to what you can do in your own lives. In June this year, on the annual Desertification and Drought Day, we focused our efforts on raising awareness of and action on sustainable consumption and production. The tagline, and apologies for that, it was June 2020, the tagline we used was food, feed, and fiber, focusing our sights firmly on agricultural products. This is because agriculture is a major driver of climate change, biodiversity loss, and land conversion. Over 40% of the world's land has been converted or set aside for agriculture alone. This has resulted in the loss of more than half of the world's forests. Commercial agriculture is a key driver, especially the production of beef, palm oil, and soybean. If natural land continues to be converted for agriculture to feed a projected global population of 10 billion, only 10% of natural land will be left by 2050. The problem is exacerbated by what we call telecoupling. As a result of globalization, land degradation today is driven by poor land uses to provide for distant, not local consumers. This removes the oversight and incentives that consumers had over their local ecosystems, ensuring they functioned well. Crucially, this disconnect is aiding food loss and waste. 1/3 of all food produced each year is lost or wasted. But it isn't just food and feed for animals that we must worry about. Throwaway fashion and technology is also damaging the land and causing climate change. Clothing and footwear production causes 8% of global greenhouse gas emissions, a figure predicted also to rise almost by 50% by 2030. All of this goes to say that what we buy, where we buy it, and how we use it has a massive impact on the land, on climate change, and on biodiversity, which means that we can make a positive difference through changes in our daily lives, in the choices that we make as consumers. This for me is in part where youth movements such as yours come in. The young generation today is far more engaged in environmental and climate action than any before it. You get it? You're prepared to go the extra mile to secure your future. So we can change our diets, we can change our shopping behaviors to free up land and lower carbon emissions. We can also force businesses to change their practices and provide full transparency on where their products come from and their impact on the land to help you make the right choices. You have more power as young people than you realize, and I really urge you to use it. In conclusion, and apologies for being so long, let me just say that protecting the land is the best way to slow climate change, to protect and restore biodiversity, to increase agricultural productivity, to provide jobs, to boost livelihoods, and to reduce poverty. This is a task not for the one, but for the many. This is our land, our earth. We must protect it together. Thank you.
Thank you, Tina, Ms. Birmpili. Thanks a lot for those very exhaustive, grim findings, but peppered with hope and optimism as well. And before I open out the question and public Q&A, if you have any questions, please post it on the chat box. Or if you want to ask a question directly to the guests, please raise your hand, and so we'll just come to that one. Before, I'll just take an opportunity to ask one or two questions. I want to ask, like, what is the role of the indigenous people and the indigenous practices in terms of land management, because it has become quite an important issue as a means to resolve the land degradation. Could you talk about, because in your recent reports that you kind of commissioned, like in the Global Land Outlook and as well as the biodiversity, Aichi biodiversity targets, there's been quite an emphasis about the indigenous methods. Could you explain, like, what is happening, any success story that you like to share, and like, is there something that we as an organization in Qatar, like in desert and arid environments, where we can look for those methods?
Mohammed, thank you very much, and it's really astonishing. Before joining this meeting, I was invited to the G20 meeting of the Deputy Environment Ministers, where Italy was presenting their priorities on land. As I said, we had a discussion on how to implement the G20 Global Initiative on Reducing Land Degradation. And one of the major comments that came from many countries from the G20 was that in our effort to scale up and to share good examples around the globe, the role of local communities and indigenous people is very essential. And this is something that the UNCCD will definitely focus on. I think the UNCCD basically is an international convention. Our countries are we also have stakeholders, but definitely we want to find the entry points to reach out to local communities and indigenous people. And we hope, both as UNCCD, but also through these G20 global initiatives, we will be able to do so. Now, I will finish off by saying that thank you for mentioning the Global Land Outlook. We will having within the next year the launch of the new Global Land Outlook. And in this one, we will have more than 100 case studies that are going to be examples that are taking place or are implemented at a very local level. But we need to go beyond that, because we need to grasp the knowledge from the indigenous people that we don't do it at this point in time. Thank you.
I wanted to ask another thing, because the UN Convention on Biological Diversity set up like 20 Aichi targets, and the latest report that published last year in September reported that none of the targets have been achieved, and like, you know, they were cited different problems. And could you explain, like, what are the challenges, like, you know, is it like on the policymakers, or is it the changing indicators, like, or is it too difficult to do it? So what challenges are you particularly witnessing?
I don't want to comment on what are the challenges that a different convention faces, but I would respond to your question by saying the these global, I think global treaties and global conventions are very important, but they are providing the global framework, and it's up to the countries to deliver at the national level. Sometimes these obligations come at a voluntary basis, and we really hope that the discussions among all the three Rio conventions that are taking place in 2021 and 2022 will bring more impetus, will unleash the potential that these conventions have, but also they will also share the burden not only on the countries to implement, but also on the other stakeholders, the private sector, the individuals. Everybody has a share if we want to succeed to this transition. I mentioned something before, and I think it's a very big opportunity, and it touches upon all issues. The UN Food System Summit. This is an initiative that is being taken, sort of given prominence by the Secretary General himself, and Italy will be co-hosting the pre-summit, and it is very, very important because we need to find ways to link the different conventions together. We, as the UNCCD, we are addressing ministries of environment. Climate change addresses Minister of Climate Change or Ministers of Foreign Affairs. CBD addresses other ministers. We need these broad issues such as a food system in order to reach to the finance ministers, to the agriculture ministers, to the forestry ministers. We need to try to have integrated approaches if we want to succeed.
Thank you. We have a question from the participant Rahul Sharma. How our lifestyle has directly connected with desertification? Could you explain it in more detail?
I think I have explained it in the sense that all our, as I've said, there is sort of, there is always an individual responsibility in what we can do. The way that our diets, the way that we dress, everything has an impact on land, and everything has an impact on the resources. The issue of sustainable consumption and production patterns have been in the public dialogue for more than 30 years now. I remember the first discussion was in Johannesburg in 2002, if I'm not mistaken. So we need to tackle both the production, which is a very big problem if we want to reduce the impacts on the environment, but we also need to see our own responsibility in those. The way that we dress, the way that we buy foods that come from different parts of the world, the way that globalization has changed the global food chains. I think all these are important information that we should have it in our minds.
Okay. Thank you. Like you hit the ball at the head of the issue. So any further questions? Ambassador, would you wonder like if you have any questions or any questions to the ambassador, like anything, please let us know as well. I just wanted to particularly highlight some of the new reports that you mentioned. I wonder like if you can just tell me like what are one is like you mentioned the Global Land Outlook report, and someone is just texting me privately and asking like what are the reports that you've been taking the data from that we need to look for. Could you just tell the report names and like where I can just post the links over here.
I have full references in whatever I said, so may I send them later by email?
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, great. Okay, so we have one tough question here. What are your views on climate change versus capitalism?
For me, this is a question for me. No, I I would say I will not respond this question directly. I will say, first of all, it's a very general question. As I said before, it's both the way that we produce things and the way that we consume things that has caught us in a very negative feedback loop. And this is something that, and it's also the economic system itself, because in the way that we assess and we value whatever activities we have on a daily basis, we never take account of the so-called externalities. We never take into account the cost that we cause to the environment by acting in one way or another. And I think this has been a very interesting discussion in the last couple of years, how we can change our economic models in order to include externalities, in order to include the cost of our actions on the environment. And I think this could be a response to the question that was addressed by our distinguished guest.
Just wanted to comment on, like, that is a very interesting book by Naomi Klein, This Changes Everything, and the new book by Noam Chomsky on global Green New Deal, and written by Noam Chomsky and Robert Pollin. I recommend you to read the book. Perhaps like you will find these views more illuminating. Any further questions? Like if you really wanted to, else we can wrap up the conversation if there are no further questions. Okay, so we don't really have any further questions. I would like, okay, so we have, how can then we convince the masses to protect biodiversity?
I think this is an ongoing struggle. There are many ways of doing that, and I think this is where I think the responsibility can be really shared. It's very important as parents to do that with our kids, the schools to do that with their students. I think the conventions themselves to raise awareness by trying to link. Sometimes we feel that, you know, we meet into these big agglomerations, and by bringing together, everybody is brought together into the same venue, we cause climate change, right? And we have a very big impact on the environment. But I think also it's a responsibility that goes out of these meetings, how we can best convey our messages and how we can make our messages tangible for people to understand. And I really believe, Neshad, that even meetings like that and the way that you have offered a forum for UNCCD to present what is our work and what we are doing at the international level can assist towards this direction. But I would really say that this is also a national responsibility, because there may be some guidelines at the international level, but it's up to the nations how they want to really, create this awareness and create this momentum into their own countries. And I don't mean only from governments, but I mean also from non-governmental organizations or movements that can create this momentum. I do believe that environment is a movement. I have always seen it like that. I think if you're passionate about it, you can also influence. You don't need to influence at once the masses, but at least you can influence your colleagues, your friends, your kids. Thank you.
Ala, I implore you to join us as well, like at Arab Youth Climate Movement Qatar. We organize a lot of events, so you can look at the website. I'll post it here, and we're happy to have conversation how you can be part of it. So there is one question from a school teacher. I'm a teacher at the International School of London here in Qatar. I have a few students here with me. We are currently looking at how biodiversity relies on maintaining the interdependent balance of ecosystems within systems. As you mentioned, humankind plays the biggest role in maintaining this balance. How can the next generation convince their local community to immediate action?
I think there are, so I will share a personal experience here, and an experience that I'm bringing forward from my previous life in ozone. It was very difficult to convince my son to understand what the issue of ozone layer depletion was. And what I found interesting is that he and his friends, they were very, very sensitive on environmental issues when they were younger and going in the primary school. But when they reached the secondary school, they were a bit more cautious. They were a bit even, more aggressive. They were, and then I realized that there is a very big gap. And I think, Jeff, this relates also to your previous question. It's very easy to convey a simple message to a primary student with recycling, with waste, with planting a tree. But when we get to the more complicated issues and the more complicated examples, possibly we have not found the way of conveying these messages to middle schoolers that are a bit more demanding. And they want to live, and they have the right to live in the way that we have lived. And what we did at that point in time, which was, I think it had a very, very positive impact, is we tried to create an app, to create a game, what the world would have looked like if we were not protecting the ozone layer 30 years ago when we started all this discussion. So I find that sometimes it's compelling to show to these young people what would be life without something that we take today for granted. And I think this power of conveying this message also through games and through apps that the young people are using, at least in that age, I think it's really powerful. But it is important to find the right language to convince these people, to convince students to keep up this interest on the environmental issues. I find it strange. I think there is a gap in these middle school years, but then they come back with more assertion and more confidence and more passion, which is something that I really, really admire.
Thank you. I mean, I would like to point one program at AYCM that we do here for the ambassadors of the environment. So where we train young ambassadors, on some of the complex topics like food chain and food webs, and about the ecosystem services, the role of ecosystem services and how each species contribute to develop different kind of ecosystem values. And so we're happy to share some of these findings, actually, how we do this one with Jeff in future. And if there are no further questions, I'd like to take this opportunity to thank our chief guest, Ms. Tina Birmpili, and our Italian ambassador, Alessandro Prunas. And I really like to thank all the members who participated for this program. And I recommend strongly to read the reports by UNCCD and all other interesting reports that's coming out. And thank you all, and do stay safe, and looking forward for future events. Thank you very much.